So I might as well try my hand at this whole abstract video essay thing. It seems to be what's in right now. Although I suppose you'd classify this as more of a structured rant than an essay, though my expository writing professor would probably argue that the two aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. No, but seriously, I've been meaning to do more videos that aren't explicitly reviews of things, and H-Bomber Guy's quite lengthy video about BBC Sherlock has got me thinking about an issue that I've been skirting around in my own stuff for a while. Something that seriously bothers me in a lot of modern media's approach to storytelling. Now, I don't entirely agree with H-Bomb on every point his video made, but this problem is one that's been getting in my craw for a while, and it needs to end. It's time to stop. Can we please get away from origin? Okay, what the heck am I talking about? Well, as far as I'm concerned, our problem starts with James Bond. This bit of context might go on for a while, but I think it's necessary, so bear with me. In 2006, Casino Royale introduced the world to Daniel Craig's take on James Bond, positioning itself as a more grounded reboot of a character and franchise that had long since gone overboard. It was a real good movie, and it contextualized all the things we associate as staples of the James Bond character, namely his emotional distance, cutthroat nature, and his views on women. It was a neat origin, and people who didn't take kindly to the character's portrayal in that film could have their issues hand-waved by one simple conceit. Casino Royale isn't about James Bond. It's about a man becoming James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
Quantum of Solace came out 2 years later, and despite picking up right where Royale left off, played much more like a standard Bond adventure. Skyfall took quite a while longer to arrive on screens, and although it was once again really well received, aspects of it felt like we were still once again treading the how Bond got his start territory. Or at least, how Bond became the Bond we know. Series staples like Q and Moneypenny were introduced. M was reintroduced, ending the film as a more traditional role that Dame Judi Dench's take was beginning to deviate from, and the climax of the movie is spent at Bond's childhood home, which gets symbolically destroyed by the end. This film was celebrating the franchise's 50th anniversary, so it's fine, but now we've got it, right? James Bond has had his character established, he's been tempered from a rash, blunt instrument into the suave spy we all know and love, thanks to personal experience, and his supporting cast are all in the roles they need to be. We have a status quo. James Bond, both the character and the franchise, is James Bond, and now we can begin to just make James Bond movies. Well...
Welcome, James. It's been a long time. And finally, here we are. Cuckoo.
Spectre was released a decade after Casino Royale, and we seriously, no, I'm not kidding for real, not making this up, seriously play the villain of this movie is a figure from our protagonist's past who secretly somehow orchestrated all of his previous adventures card. So, ha! Psych! Even after 10 years, it turns out James Bond hadn't worked through his emotional baggage, and you're likely never going to see Daniel Craig's Bond in a movie that isn't some subversive, formative experience to slowly get the character where you want him. Look, you can make a Bond movie a character-driven story. You can give James Bond a character arc, but must that always translate to having it always turn out that he still isn't a complete person yet? But hey, whatever, it's just James Bond, right? Who cares if one property gets stuck spinning its wheels? Well, does this sound like any other fictional icons you might know? The public has a very well-defined view of Superman. His outlook, his values, his demeanor, and Zack Snyder allegedly set about making Man of Steel as an origin that would start Clark Kent off in a very different place, before eventually moving him somewhere closer to what most are used to.
And I was like, I really feel like we should kill Zod, and I really feel like Superman should kill him. And the why of it was, for me, I go, if it's truly an origin story, his aversion to killing is unexplained. It's just in his DNA, and I felt like we needed him to do something, just like him putting on the glasses or going to the Daily Planet, or any of the other things that you're sort of seeing for the first time that you realize will then become sort of his thing.
Let's ignore all of the potential problems with approaching your movie about hope from a place of inherent cynicism, and assume that Snyder really did need to start Superman off in a less altruistic place so that the audience could get behind him. Let's assume that it was absolutely imperative we spend a whole movie making Superman Superman, and let's assume that this infamous moment is when it finally happens. This is when, as the sequel Batman v Superman puts it, mankind is introduced to the Superman. Here is Superman's very first action in that very same sequel. Something isn't adding up. For the purposes of Clark's character in BVS, Man of Steel might as well not have happened. None of what he's learned is stuck with him, not just about not killing his enemies, but about why he does what he does. Clark gets further away from the ideal of hope than ever before over the course of this film. And before he can overcome this struggle, before he can step closer to the ideal and be Superman, he dies. Superman is killed before the movie-going public gets to see him truly be Superman. Yes, this is slightly alleviated in the extended cut of the film, but the point remains that throughout 2 movies, each upwards of 3 hours long, Superman remains incomplete. In 2 theatrical appearances, Clark Kent himself still doesn't know what Superman is for. I sure am glad Marvel doesn't have that problem, son of a...
Damn, Daniel! Back at it again with the...
Pretending you've had a character arc. Iron Fist is a 13-episode series. Danny Rand has had his story told over 13 bloody hours. So why do I know less about him than I do characters I've spent a fifth of that time with? Who is this man? What does he want? What are his values? What he cares about and how much he cares about it seems to change from scene to scene, as does his temperament. The show seems to enjoy pointing out when he's being a terrible Iron Fist, and one of the very last scenes is outright calling him a crazy person. So why hasn't any of that changed? Again, 13 hours. 13 hours, and we've still got people talking in interviews about how Danny will truly become the Iron Fist over the course of another 8-hour series, in which he won't even be the singular protagonist. What was the point of doing an Iron Fist show if your character isn't going to be Iron Fist by the end of 13 hours? It can't rightly be to study the man's character because we still don't know who he is, really. I mean, what other show would spend that much time with a character all for it to turn out to be pretense? Just a slow burn introduction to a character who only at the tail end of it might possibly, maybe become what the viewer came to see later. Wait, 13 minus 1 special equals 12 divided by 3 episodes, and that's... Oh. I knew I'd pick up that thread somewhere. At least I did it faster than Stephen Moffat. I wholeheartedly enjoy Series 1 and 2 of Sherlock, even if the whole show is more like watching the same magic trick with different trappings than it is looking at a mystery that asks anything of you as an audience member. It is a fun trick to witness. When Sherlock can pull off its titular character's deductions, I don't much care that I didn't get to put the pieces together along with him, because the mental gymnastics I have to do to comprehend it as it's being explained are stimulus enough. That's when the show is at its best, when it's Sherlock Holmes and John Watson putting together pieces of a crime and laying it out in at least a semi-believable fashion, the who and the how for the audience. The crimes themselves, befitting a character as clever as Holmes, are unique and interesting, and for a while, Sherlock and John's personal lives and various hang-ups felt natural to keep these cases anchored in character. Then there comes a moment when you slowly realize that episodes become less and less about solving crimes, when both Series 3 and 4 only have 1/3 of their episodes actually dedicated to a whodunit or howdunit. The show begins to get overtaken more and more with each passing year by navel-gazing from the inside out about its own mythos, and suddenly character drama stops being the anchor and becomes the main attraction. Sherlock and John are in constant conflict with each other. Their relationships to each other and those around them is constantly subject to tension that should be devoted to cracking cases. Much like James Bond deciding to retire, come back to the game, and go rogue for 2 movies in a row, our status quo is shaky, and so too is the foundation for what the show is allegedly about. How did this happen? When did Sherlock stop being about cases and start being about interpersonal melodrama, and why? Then you see this.
Like they've always been there, and they always will. My Baker Street boys. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson.
You see, this speech and this image is as if to say, yeah, Sherlock Holmes and John Watson solving crimes. That's what it's all about. And then you realize the first 4 series of Sherlock were all about Sherlock Holmes becoming Sherlock Holmes. It's time to stop. It's time to stop spending years and years of real time and hours of screen time on characters getting to be the characters. Viewers will accept an Iron Fist or a Superman or a James Bond or a Sherlock Holmes that arrives on their screen fully formed. This preoccupation with justifying characterization through constant deconstruction followed by reconstruction reeks of insecurity. Some characters really do have a story in their origin. Some characters, however, were just meant to have stories told about them being rather than becoming. Let Bond be Bond. Let Superman be Superman. Because becoming has become a trend, and it's a trend that hurts these characters more than it helps. Should you ever get your hands on an iconic character, a character you love, maybe the best way to make other people share in your love isn't to explain, or excuse, or transition them into what you know them to be. Maybe the best thing you can do is just let them be.